The Boeing 757 hasn't been built since 2004, yet its engines are worth more today than they were a few years ago. You can buy a used one for under $16 million, while a new 767 freighter lists at over $220 million, and UPS runs an entire narrow-body fleet built on a single type. Around 75 of these jets, a plane the manufacturer walked away from 2 decades ago, has no replacement, rising parts values, and a booming second life half a world away. Boeing stopped building it. The world refuses to let it die. So how does a dead jet become irreplaceable? That question sits at the center of one of the strangest stories in commercial aviation, because if this aircraft is so valuable that scrap engines are appreciating, someone should be building a replacement right now. Nobody is. Not Boeing, not Airbus. And that raises a harder question. What happens to Global Express cargo when the last airframe is finally gone? Boeing ended a 23-year production run and simply walked away. Production wound down in October 2004, and the final airframe, the 1050th 757 ever built, was delivered to Shanghai Airlines on the 28th of November 2005. That was supposed to be the end. A clean retirement for a jet that had served its purpose. It didn't work out that way. All 1,050 of those airframes are now decades old, and even the youngest ones being converted today rolled off the line before 2005. An aging population of aircraft, no factory replenishing it, no successor in sight. By every conventional metric, this should be a story about a plane fading quietly into museums and desert boneyards. The 757 refused to fade because nothing filled its niche. It was an unusual machine from the start, the first Boeing airliner ever launched with engines built outside the United States. That was the Rolls-Royce RB211-535, an engine that would become central to everything that came later. Boeing designed the aircraft to do things smaller narrow-bodies couldn't, and to do them cheaper than wide-bodies could. So an aircraft with no factory support, no production line, and no replacement plan kept flying, kept earning, kept getting more valuable in ways that make no sense on paper. Why are the world's cargo giants fighting to keep a jet older than some of their pilots? By 1979, the answer was already being drawn on Boeing's engineering boards, though nobody knew it yet. A single design decision made in the late 1970s created the most valuable feature the 757 has today. It came from a team led by a young engineer named Alan Mullally. Boeing had hired him straight out of college in 1969, and by the late 70s he was leading the cockpit design team on a pair of new aircraft, the 757 and the widebody 767. What his team built was revolutionary. It was the first all-digital flight deck in a commercial aircraft, and it was shared across 2 completely different airplanes. Boeing committed to a common 2-crew glass cockpit for both jets in early 1979. The company used computer-aided design for over a third of the 757's design drawings, remarkable for the era. But the deeper decision was the shared architecture, the same flight deck, the same auxiliary power unit, the same hydraulics and electrical systems, spanning a narrow body and a wide body at once. The result is something the FAA formally recognizes to this day. The regulator designates the shared pilot qualification as B757, B767, one type rating covering both jets. That pairing is unusual because a narrow body and a wide body almost never share a license. A pilot certified on one is certified on the other. A mechanic trained on one already understands the systems on the other. Spare parts overlap. Training budgets shrink. At the time, this looked like clever engineering, a way to sell 2 aircraft to the same customer and keep their costs down. Later, it would prove to be the single most important reason a discontinued jet became indispensable to the companies that move the world's packages. That cockpit decision would become the cargo giant's secret weapon. The airframe was only half the story. The other half came from Derby, England. The 757's engines gave it brute thrust and hot and high muscle that no modern narrow-body can match, and that engine is now the beating heart of the whole paradox. The man who ran the launch customer understood it immediately. Frank Borman was president of Eastern Airlines, and before that, he had commanded Apollo 8 around the moon. Borman called the RB211-535C the finest airline engine in the world. Coming from a man who had flown to lunar orbit and back, that wasn't a phrase used lightly. The engine had an unusual lineage. Rolls-Royce adapted the RB211-535 from the power plant it had built for the Lockheed L1011 TriStar, reducing the fan diameter and removing the first intermediate pressure compressor stage. It was the first time Rolls-Royce ever provided a launch engine on a Boeing aircraft, a genuine break from decades of American engine dominance. What that engine produces is the reason cargo operators still covet the airframe. The 757's engines generate up to around 43,000 pounds of thrust, giving the jet one of the highest thrust-to-weight ratios of any narrowbody ever built. It can lift off in roughly 6,500 feet at maximum weight. That's precisely what a freight operator wants: the ability to haul dense, heavy cargo out of short runways and hot, high-altitude airfields that would leave a modern single aisle struggling. The market noticed in May 1988, American Airlines ordered 50 RB211-535E4 powered 757s, citing the engine's low noise, the first significant order for Rolls-Royce from a US carrier since the TriStar. That order helped cement the -535E4 as the dominant engine on the type. Hold that engine in mind. Its price is about to do something that shouldn't be possible. The 757 was designed as a passenger jet. Its real destiny turned out to be something else entirely. As passenger 757s aged out of airline fleets, the express giants realized the aircraft was a nearly perfect freighter, and the shared cockpit plus cheap airframes made the arithmetic irresistible. This wasn't a later discovery. Boeing built the 757 as a freighter from the beginning. The first factory-built 757-200PF made its first flight on the 11th of August 1987, and UPS took delivery of its first two aircraft on the 16th and 17th of September that same year. In total, Boeing built 80 factory freighters, and roughly 75 of them went to UPS. Then came the conversions. Boeing launched the 757-200SF passenger-to-freighter program in 2000, with DHL as the launch customer for 44 aircraft. The first converted 757 was delivered to DHL in 2001, opening a second pipeline of freighters that didn't need a factory line at all, just aging passenger jets and a conversion shop. FedEx made the biggest bet of all. Across 2006 and 2007, the company committed roughly $2.6 billion to acquire around 80 to 90 converted 757s, replacing its aging fleet of Boeing 727 Tri-Js. The switch delivered a 25% reduction in operating costs and substantial noise reductions, and the replacement was completed by 2013. An entire generation of noisy three-engine jets gave way to the 757. Today, the numbers tell the story plainly. UPS runs its narrowbody operation entirely on 757-200PFs, around 75 of them, per the carrier's own 2026 fleet fact sheet, using them as medium-haul links between regional markets and its hubs. FedEx is the largest operator of the converted 757-200SF, with a fleet that runs somewhere between 77 and 87 aircraft, depending on the source and date. And this is where that late 1970s cockpit finally pays off. Pilots dual qualified on the B757 and 767 or across the 737 and 757-67 can satisfy their recency requirements under Federal Regulation 14 CFR 121.439 by completing 3 takeoffs and landings in either type every 90 days. That single rule lets a cargo carrier pool its crews across aircraft, keeping pilots current without dedicating separate rosters to each type. Cheap airframes, shared crews, shared parts. That's why they keep a jet older than some of their pilots. By 2024, though, the economics had sharpened into something even more compelling. A converted 757 costs a sliver of a new freighter, and it can fly the profitable midnight window without a crushing finance note. That's the real engine of this story. Start with the feedstock. A used 757-200 airframe sells for roughly $7.8 to $15.8 $1.86 million. The original list price was around $65 million. A brand new 767-300F lists at over $220 million. Even after conversion, an all-in converted 757 typically runs between $30 and $60 million, a fraction of a new build and available far sooner than waiting years for a delivery slot. The depreciation is what makes it lethal. A 757 has already burned off most of its value across decades of passenger service, so a converted freighter can sit idle by day and fly only the midnight express window, the few hours each night when packages actually move, and still turn a profit. A new build freighter carrying a large monthly finance note can't afford to sit still. It has to fly around the clock to justify itself. The old jet doesn't. And the aircraft itself hits a genuine sweet spot. A converted 757 carries up to around 84,000 to 87,700 pounds of payload across as many as 15 pallets with roughly 6,600 cubic feet of volume. The industry describes it as an aircraft admired for hitting the economic sweet spot in capacity, efficiency, ease of loading, and reliability. Big enough to matter, small enough to fill. Building that capability into an old passenger jet is serious surgery. Converters install a large upward opening main deck cargo door on the forward port side of the fuselage, roughly 134 by 86 inches, reinforced with titanium. The cabin is stripped and relined with smooth fiberglass. A fixed, rigid 9G barrier wall with a sliding door goes in right behind the flight deck, so a shifting load can never crush the crew. One company dominates this work. Precision Aircraft Solutions, based in Beaverton, Oregon, leads the 757 conversion market and builds the only converted 757 freighter that carries a full 15 pallets. When a passenger 757 becomes a freighter, more often than not, it passes through their shop. But here's the catch. As these aircraft retire, something impossible starts happening to their prices. How does a plane get more valuable the more people abandon it? That's the central irony of the entire story. As operators retire the type, the engines and parts don't get cheaper, they get more expensive. The RB211-535E4 has risen in value since the start of 2025, despite the retirements driven by the high cost of engine shop visits and surging demand for used serviceable material. The scarcer the supply of good engines, the more each surviving one is worth. The people who trade these assets explain it in plain terms. Louis Preble, president of airlines and fleets at Standard Aero, attributes the strong engine, module, and parts values to the constrained availability of good quality assets with significant cycles remaining. In other words, there are only so many engines left with real life in them, and everyone who needs one is bidding for the same shrinking pool. Preble also notes the type is enjoying new life with secondary and tertiary operators, especially in Central Asia, which props values up further. This changes what even a dead airframe is worth. A 757 stripped of everything else still holds value because it can be cannibalized to keep other aircraft flying. RB211-powered 757s are explicitly being bought for teardown, purchased not to fly, but to feed the cargo market with parts. The aircraft becomes an organ donor for the fleet that survives it. The infrastructure has been quietly building for years. Orn Standard Aero has serviced RB211-535 engines at its San Antonio facility since 2018, keeping the power plants overhauled and airworthy long after Boeing closed the production line. That's the first hook paid in full, a plane that hasn't been built in over 2 decades, whose engines are worth more now than they were a few years ago. By 2020, the reason no replacement exists had already been decided in a Boeing boardroom. Boeing's intended successor died in the cradle, Airbus swept in, and the result is a jet with no true replacement, only a partial one waiting in the wings. The plan had existed. At the 2017 Paris Air Show, Boeing signaled that a new mid-size aircraft, informally the 797, would adopt the composite technology of the 777 and 787 as a replacement for both the 757 and 767. Then in January 2020, new chief executive David Calhoun restarted the program as a clean sheet study, asking his team to step back and reassess the entire commercial product strategy. By 2022, Boeing signaled at least a 2-year wait before development could continue, citing the need for advances in turbofan engine technology. The timing could not have been worse. The Successor program was paused in early 2020, just as the 737 MAX crisis and the COVID pandemic hit Boeing simultaneously. While Boeing hesitated, Airbus moved. Its A321XLR, launched back in 2019, captured the exact slice of demand Boeing had vacated. The manufacturer that walked away from the 757 in 2004 tried to build a replacement, then abandoned that too, leaving a 40-year-old design with no successor at all. Airbus's freighter answer comes close, but only close. The A321-200 PCF carries about 95% of the 757's volume, while burning at least 20% less fuel, which is why the industry calls it the logical and only follow-on. But no clean-sheet single-aisle freighter exists, nothing purpose-designed to inherit the 757's role. The Successor is a converted narrowbody, not a new idea. The people converting these jets know exactly where this ends. Zach Young, sales director at Precision Aircraft Solutions, puts it bluntly. When 757 feedstock eventually runs out, operators will have no choice but to go to the A321 as a replacement of similar size. That's the answer to the question the whole video opened with. No one builds a true replacement because the economics of converting old jets beat the economics of designing new ones, and when the old jets are gone, the industry simply moves to the next hand-me-down. By 2026, that future was already arriving in 2 directions at once. The feedstock is finite and running out, but for now, the 757 is finding a booming second life with new operators, even as its Western giants begin to let go. The pipeline still has depth. More than 220 suitable conversion candidates remain in passenger service, built between 1990 and 2004 with under 28,000 cycles on the airframe. A finite, dwindling supply. But right now it's actually being strengthened because the big US carriers are retiring their passenger 757s. United plans to retire its entire 757 fleet by the end of 2026, having ordered 130 A321neos and 50 A321XLRs, partly to replace it. Delta retired 23 of its 757-200s in 2025, more than double the year before, pointing to the A321neo as its answer. Every one of those retired passenger jets is a potential freighter, and the demand to convert them is coming from new places. AirSail leased a 757-200 PCF to Stratos Freight, a carrier based in Tashkent, in a deal announced on the 31st of March 2026, for routes linking Central Asia, China, Europe, and the Middle East. A jet retired by an American major becomes the backbone of a growing carrier in Uzbekistan. That pattern is the future of the whole sector. Boeing's own 2025 commercial market outlook forecasts demand for 2,900 new freighters over the next 2 decades, and 2/3 of them are expected to be passenger-to-freighter conversions rather than new builds. Cargo aviation is becoming a hand-me-down business, and the 757 wrote the template for it. Today, the global 757 freighter fleet sits somewhere between 311 and 318 aircraft, still moving packages across every continent. The plane that outlived its own death notice now has a sunset with an actual date on it, sometime after the last of those 220 candidates gets converted and the feedstock finally runs dry. But that day is years away, and until then, the airframe keeps finding new homes. The 757 is being retired by the very giants that built its legend, and reborn at the same moment by new operators half a world away. It's a plane no one will replace, kept alive by economics no clean sheet design can beat. In April 2026, Captain Mukhtar Kaitov, the chief executive of Stratos Freight in Tashkent, welcomed his carrier's 757-200 PCF as central to expanding its international network. A 40-year-old design that Boeing abandoned in 2004 was, for a growing airline in Central Asia, the aircraft opening a brand new chapter. The last 757 rolled out of the factory in 2005. 20 years later, the world still hasn't figured out how to live without it. Click here to check out another video.